Now, GNI stands for Gross National Income, okay? And a lot of students get that confused with GDP. It's not a very different thing, it incorporates it, but it is different to GDP. GDP, Gross Domestic Product, is all the goods and services produced in this country, all the income in this country, all the output, all the spending, right? It's C plus I plus G plus X minus M, it's aggregate demand. What GNI does is it uses GDP, but on top of that, it adds more the net income from abroad. Okay, so all the money we make from abroad. Now, quick question, why have I said net income from abroad? Why don't I just say income from abroad? What do you think I mean when I say net? Why would I have, it's really net. It's not enough just to say GNI is GDP plus income from abroad. That wouldn't give you the mark. Have this is net. Why do you add net? Sorry?
Because it's net.
Yeah, good, that's it, okay? Net income includes money that's coming in, so that's a good out. Now, again, another question. When I say income coming in and income going out, what does that mean? What do I mean by income coming into the country? Because we're all earning here, this is all a part of our economy, that's aggregate demand, GDP. We're not exported, that's part of aggregate demand. Yeah, good. If we can own properties abroad, if I own 10% of a business abroad, I'm going to be receiving profits every month. That's money coming into the UK. If I own a house in France and I rent it out, I'm going to be making money every month. That's money coming in. Okay. So income from abroad is essentially interest. It could be interest if I save money abroad, but dividends, profits that I receive from abroad. That's income coming in. The reason we say net is because people from abroad own property in this country. People in America own houses all over London. People in China own businesses here. So we're actually giving them money as well. So it's important to say net. GNI, what you need to know is what it is and how it compares with GDP. So GDP is all of aggregate demand. GNI is GDP plus net income from abroad. And you can give an example like dividends. Dividends are profits that you earn when you own a business. Yeah? Does anyone have any questions on GNI? Very, very simple thing. It's not a big topic over GNI. What you do need to know is essentially the definition. So let's give it. So GDP plus net income from abroad. And that gives you a GNI figure. Yeah?
What's dividends?
Dividends is profits that you earn on a business. And obviously, if it's abroad, I might own 10% of a company in Brazil. I'll be receiving profits. The profit I get is called dividends. Right, guys, any other questions? No, so like I said, very, very specific, very, very short thing as well. It's not a big part or spec. The next part, obviously, is a really important measure I'm indicating. Okay, so we'll spend a bit of time on this, inflation. Now, the key things you need to know for inflation, for your course, for your AS, is obviously what inflation is. You need to know the factors that cause inflation. Demonstrate inflation is in the AS, so I'm going to go through that. And some consequences of inflation. You do also need to know about policies to control inflation. So there's a lot of stuff with inflation. It's the same thing with every government macroeconomic objective. Okay? As a class, we're really good with policy now. Okay? We spent the entire week pretty much last week going through policy. So for inflation, what I'd like you to do is be able to define it, tell me one or two causes of it, what actually causes inflation, and some issues or some consequences of it, and the policy aspects of it. So we're going to go through all of them. We'll spend about 10 minutes on inflation. And I'll start off with the definition. The definition of inflation is that there is a general rise in average prices. Okay? It's inflation, it's the price level, it's the same thing. It's a general rise in the average price level. So that means on average in the UK, prices are increasing. That's inflation. It might be 0.1%, it might be 2.1%. On average, prices are going up. Does anyone remember how it was measured? The way it measured, okay? CPI, consumer price index. Now what that was a basket of goods. Okay, the way it works is the government looks at about 700 goods and services that most people buy, very common goods in the UK, and it checks how much are those 700 goods worth on average. And now next month, how much is it worth? The month after, how much is it worth? If those average goods are becoming more and more expensive, it means there's inflation present. Okay? So it's a general rise on average price levels. On average, there's a rise in prices. That's inflation. And what I'd like you to do is come up with the causes. Why would inflation occur? Now, back to basics. Best way to answer this is think about the diagram, right? AD shifts upwards, there's inflation. So why inflation goes up? Why that could happen? Interest rates, income tax, confidence, C plus I, any of those going up, that's inflation. Demand could shift outwards, or what else could cause inflation? Yeah, aggregate supply shifting inwards. Maybe cost of production has gone up. Maybe corporation tax has gone up. Maybe wages have gone up. VAT, whatever. That will shift aggregate supply to the left. So they're the two key factors, causes of inflation. So I want you to try and explain them. In an exam, it's important that you use the terminology. So when you remember what it's called, when demand is at fault, when it's because of demand there's inflation. There's a specific term for it.
Inflation.
Specific term when demand causes inflation. Yeah, demand pull. Yeah, that's because of demand. And obviously it's aggregate demand. And what's the other one called? Cost push. Good. There are only two factors. So you need to be able to explain those and then look at consequences. Okay. So consequences could be things like if inflation is too high. Remember what that means. Our prices are too high. People from abroad might not buy our products, so it can damage the balance of payment. So that's one thing. Balance of payment could be damaged if inflation is too high. Another thing is it's bad for our standard of living. We can't buy as many goods and services. The value of our money reduces. Okay? £1 could buy you this much, now £1 can only buy you this much. So I'm going to give you, I want to do quite a few things anyway. I'll give you 5 more minutes to sort of get around inflation. If you have any questions, policy, again, anything that reduces AD. So we've done a lot of that, fiscal, monetary, supply side, anything that shifts it outwards.
What did he
So
say
5
about
minutes, you work through inflation, again, you decide what factors are. Are you going to reshape the reasoning? Are you going to do factors? Are you going to make notes? Are you going to read? It's up to you. Obviously, if you have any questions, please do ask.
You ask, I don't care. And this isn't actually revision, just when you're revising, then just keep it as a
I'm going to use it to see what I need to revise the most.
I just wish you could maybe go through everything and just say everything you actually specifically need to know.
No, for GNI, it's going to be a 3 or 4 mark question.
How do you know that?
Because they literally said the only thing you need to know is what it is and GNI versus GDP.
So guys, just like I said,
Or it might be like, what's the difference between GNI
Yeah,
and
that would be
GDP?
3 marks.
That's 2 marks.
Factors that cause it, consequences,
Is there 2 mark
and
questions?
policy.
Yeah, then that'll be 2
That's
marks.
everything you need to know for inflation for your A level. Now, in your mock, you're probably not gonna have to do all 4 of those things, but that's what you need for the specs. The way we're revising is it's not just targeting the mock. A lot of this stuff will be coming up, but you need to have a generic view of everything. Okay? So just a few more minutes and then we can move on.
I'm not going to be able to have an idea of everything, like, in the spec. I'm only going to know the topics you need to know. I don't have time.
One is, this one says that we're at our full, regardless, in the long run we'll always be at our full capacity. So for this part of the course, for LRES, the key things you need to know are obviously what it is, long run aggregate supply, demonstrates our capacity, shows full employment, shows maximum potential, whichever one you want to use. So that's the first thing, knowing what it is. Secondly, you need to be able to demonstrate the 2 different types. So you've got the classical LRES, you've got the Keynesian LRES. This is the one I would draw. So remember I said in the 15 and 20 mark essay, if you're doing ADAS, I would go for this diagram. Okay? And the only other thing you need to know about this is the things that, the factors that shift the LRES curve. Things that shift it, anything that shifts PPM. So we've got better technology, you can shift them outwards. Whichever one you draw, by the way, shift this one or that one. So better technology, shift it outwards. More resources, shift it outwards. Natural disaster, shift it inwards. Better workers, shift it outwards. More workers, shift it outwards. It's the same thing with the PPM, okay? So one other thing I am going to show you is obviously the first, not the first, it would have been the first one we did, so real GDP, aggregate demand. This one is your SRAS, so just bear that in mind. You need to know the difference between all of them, okay? You need to careful in exam with random chains of reasoning. If you're talking about anything long run, efficiency, productivity, the labour force, how productive we are, just our skills, education, infrastructure, all of those sort of big long-term things, you use these two diagrams. Okay? The only time you use this one is when you're talking about short run. For example, wages have gone up, supply shifts to the left. That's when you use this. If wages go up, it's not about the long run. That's not making workers more efficient or whatnot. It's important you use this one. Okay, so for your exam, for your spec, you need to know what LRAS is, how to demonstrate it, factor that shift there, and just make sure you know, that's just me adding something extra on, just make sure you know the difference, so you know which one to use when. So for your 20-mark essay, when you're talking about supply side policy, which is I think the next thing, when you're doing supply side policy, if it's about productivity or increased spending on education so the workers are better, more skilled, then yeah, you use this one. If you're going to say something like, let's cut income taxes and more people want to work, meaning wages are going to be lower, you charge lower wages, the firm's cost has gone down and that shift SRA is outwards. So this one is really about cost of production. If you can think of a reason why a firm's cost could go up or down, use this one. This is more long term. Okay? So I'm just going to give you a few minutes just on that. You can, it's up to you how you use the next few minutes. You can draw the diagram and underneath this bullet point when you will shift it. Why does it look the way it does? This one implies we're always using our resources, always at capacity. This one implies that in the short run, sometimes we might not be fully efficient. Sometimes we're actually wasting resources. Yeah, Aaron?
So when do we use the middle one?
Which one? This one?
Yeah.
I would never use that one unless I'm asked. Unless, it says draw that one or explain that one. I personally wouldn't use that one. Because this has the long one, but it's also got this one, which is more realistic. Some economists prefer this one, but I just don't like that one. So long run is here, this is the short run.
Can I just type
So I'll give you
question
5
in
minutes
to
until about 5:02.
Copy.
5:02 before we move on to the next topic area. Okay, let me know if you have any
Is this
questions.
gonna do like?
Short run is always related to
Minus.
cost of production.
It only has like one thing. So am I
The
gonna
next
have to
topic
like
is
put
supply side policy, which we're
all
going to
of
do very
this to one
quickly.
side before I
We
solve
spent
it?
2 hours on it the other day.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, you do.
So
Just copy and log.
I don't think you can.
I'm sure of anything, let me know. Make sure you're labeling diagram correctly. You will be drawing in the AS diagrams.
Wait.
I don't think there'll ever be a macro here where you don't draw in the AS. Same with micro without supply demand. So please make sure you get the labeling correct as well. Show equilibrium. Make sure you label this as Y rather than Q, it's more macro. P1 also considered the same. But like I said, if you have it's still 4 more minutes, but if you feel like you're okay with it, this is the next topic area. Supply side policies to achieve objectives. Consider some policies, how might I achieve different objectives, how might I shift supply curves.
That's fine. Oh, you finished it. No, it's fine. 1, 2, 3. It's fine.
Education, privatization, went through a lot of different things. I'm not going to spend any more of our sort of limited time on that. The next topic area is the government budget. Okay? For this one, what I'd like you to do is explain the types of budgets. So explain what's meant by a budget deficit, a budget surplus, and a balanced budget. Those are the 3 things. So what do they mean? And then secondly, why could it occur? Why might we be in a surplus? Or what would have to happen for us to be in a surplus? What would have to happen for us to be in a budget deficit? And then what do you mean by those things? What do you mean by a balanced budget? Just make sure you don't get confused between a budget deficit and a trade deficit or current account. Budget is all about the government, so fiscal, spending, and so on. And one last thing to bear in mind, be careful with the language you use. Please don't say it's the amount the government makes compared to how much they spend. Be more specific. Tax revenue that they receive is greater than the government expenditure. that's a surplus. So we're bringing in more money than we're spending. Why might that happen? Okay, so 5 minutes on this small topic area. What is a surplus? What is a deficit? What is a balanced budget? Why would they
That
occur?
means something.
We will come back to this later on this basic law. Obviously, you need to know what interest rates are, cost of borrowing, what you're saving. You need to be able to demonstrate the impact of a change in interest rates. So if interest rates suddenly went up, you can talk about shifting AD inwards. If it went down, shift AD outwards. You need to know what it is, the demonstration of it, as well as some of the impacts. So you need to be able to do that chain of reasoning. If there's a change in interest rate, what would that mean for aggregate demand and its components? What could it mean in the long run? So again, I'm just going to give you 5 minutes on interest rates. You can easily just write interest rates and go on to economic cells. There's a lot there. Key things are knowing what it is, demonstrating it, and knowing the impact of it. Now, the reason we're not spending so much time on it is because we've just done monetary policy. We spent a lot of time on interest rates and the impact of it and the consequences. So that's why there's some things we are going through quite quickly. Now, because it's not important, but because we've just recently done this. I'd rather spend a bit of time on things that you would have done during lockdown. So you know what you're working what I mean by it is drawing the diagrams, factors, shifting it, equilibrium. So I'm not going to spend any time on that. We are going to spend the next 10 minutes on the effect of reducing the budget deficit. So that's a really, really sort of topical thing. It has been for the last decade or so. So if the government wants to reduce that deficit in order to pay off the national debt, turn their deficit into a surplus, have money left over, pay the national debt, that's the sort of objective as a goal. What you need to be able to do is analyse some of the effects of actually reducing the deficit. Might sound great, let's reduce the deficit and pay off the debt. You need to realise there are lots of complications and implications. So for example, or the best way to look at it is think about the objectives. If the government suddenly tried to reduce the deficit, first think about how they reduce it. The way you reduce the deficit is by taxing people more, so you're bringing in more money, and you cut spending, so you're spending less. That's how you reduce the deficit. Think about all the negatives of that, not even just negatives, it could be positives, of the consequences of trying to reduce the deficit. If I'm going to increase my taxes and reduce my spending, think about the knock-on effects on economic growth, on unemployment levels, on inflation levels, on the balance of payments, people's living standards, okay? All of those things on the environment, on inequality. You need to be able to analyse the impact on different policies, different objectives. Okay? You can talk about, you can even think about the long run. If the government suddenly says we're going to tax businesses more and we're going to spend less, a lot of businesses might not invest. So it might damage our productive potential if firms don't invest. It might damage efficiency. If we're not efficient, we're not competitive. It might damage the balance of trade. We might not export as much. If I'm going to tax people more, they might engage in illegal activities. They might earn just in cash. Those kind of things are real sort of serious issues of trying to reduce the deficit.
He keeps putting budget on the
Essentially, that's how you reduce it. Yeah, that's it. So that's a really good way of looking at it. The impact of contractionary fiscal policy. So that's how you reduce the deficit, contractionary fiscal policy. And you need to realize, be able to analyze the consequences of doing so. So if you wanted to do that, you increase taxes. AD shifts inwards. There's already less economic growth. No GDP is being damaged. Lots of people might lose their jobs because of that. Income levels are lower. People are not being able to afford as much. Standards of living will be lower. Good thing is, we've just lowered inflation. If you lower inflation, people might buy more goods and services from our country. So there's a lot of different things you can say. We'll go into about 4.5 on this. Again, you can go on economic help or use the fiscal policy points. About 4.5, I'm going to go through the last two and give the last 10 minutes to go through the last two topics. We might be saving the environment if there's less production, a lot of things, so that's for evaluation.
It's not always negative, that's what she said. That's what she said.
All of the different government objectives, keep the impact.
keep relating back to everything.
No, we might as well just do that.
You need to know what it is.
Exchange rates.
It's the
You need
price
to
of
know
one
what it
currency
is.
relative to another.
Price
You
of one
also need to be
currency
able
relative to
to
another.
understand appreciation, depreciation, and the impact of that. So, for example, if there was a depreciation of the pound, what are some of the consequences of that? What does that mean for aggregate demand? What does it mean for consumption? What could it mean for the balance of payment? You need to make sure you're able to link exchange rates and analyze the consequences. So I'll give you some ideas. If there's a depreciation of the pound, that means the value of the pound becomes worse, becomes weak. As a result of that, firms and consumers from abroad can purchase more of our goods and services. We can export more. At the same time, consumers in the UK can't afford as much from abroad. It's more expensive to buy things from abroad. That means it improves the balance of payment. As well as that, consumers here might actually consume here instead. Consumption also increases at the same time. That's one impact. That's the main impact of exchange rates. Okay, so it's important we understand the impact of exchange rates as an appreciation or a depreciation. And please just bear in mind when you're explaining things, be specific. Don't just say, oh, it's more expensive. Explain it the way I've just done. It's harder for people from abroad to purchase goods domestically or purchase goods in the UK because it's relatively expensive compared to theirs. That's the kind of language.
It's harder for people abroad to.
Okay?
I don't know, it's more
That's pretty much it for exchange rates. What it is, exchange rates is a big chunk
I'm gonna
of
try
the year 13. Before we come back to it, there's diagrams for it, supply and demand,
No.
there's different types, it becomes a bit more difficult. At AS, it's more about appreciation, depreciation, what's the impact, okay?
Oh, we can
You could even link it to unemployment. If there's a strong pound, it means the export industry is not going to do well. People won't buy from us. Now imagine you're somebody who works in that industry and the risk of you losing your job. Okay? The final topic area, the impact of changes in AD employment. Again, very straightforward. Consumption changes, what does that do to AD? Or what does that do to the general? So for example, if consumption was to drop, or if investment was to fall, there'd be less economic growth, there'd be lower levels of inflation, higher levels of unemployment. Our trade might benefit because our prices are cheaper, so you need to know some consequences of that. Anytime you write about impact, you can almost always link it back to the policies. Talk about inequality, not policies, sorry, objective. Economic growth, unemployment, balance of payment, inflation, even those other ones, like inequality, budget. So if consumption goes down, AD shifts downwards, there's less economic growth, lots of unemployment, government's going to have to spend more now, and they're going to receive less money, so that's another impact. That's what you need to be familiar with, okay? It's around 1/4 past, we've got just under 10 minutes, about 8 minutes, so you decide what it is you want to work on. Ideally, one of the last ones, or you can just spend a few minutes on each one, it's relatively straightforward. What I'd recommend now that we've gone through most of the entire list, when you're doing any time you're spending for economics and you want revision, you obviously come back to this, make sure you can do chains of reasoning. Pick whatever topic you want to work on, interest rates, can you write a paragraph on it? For this, can you write a paragraph for that? You're not going to write a paragraph for all of them in an exam. If at home you can write those paragraphs, it makes the exam a lot easier. Because it shows what you can and can't do. If you're trying to write a paragraph and after sentence 2 you don't know what to say, it means the knowledge isn't there for that topic. So you can go and read about it, research, or ask me about it. So that's all the topics. Like I said, once you're confident on those topics, please look at the spec. Look at the spec questions. Standard of living, not on there. Okay, unemployment, not on there. GDP, not on there. The loss of price level, not on there. But there's things that form your chain of reasoning. So 8 minutes. 7 minutes. It's like we are working on. And next Thursday, 12:30, no, 12:30, 10 o'clock to 12 o'clock, we're doing the exact same thing for the micro topics. So we're going to double lesson, going through it. We might have some more time for changes. My recommendation, any revision from now until next Thursday should be macro. That way when you come to me on Thursday, you can ask any questions you need. And then from that day onwards, you can start micro revision for a week. Because there's still going to be over a week left before your exams. So, or 2 weeks, more than 2 weeks, 2.5 weeks. So for now, it should just be macro. Next Thursday, when we start micro, that's when you should be focusing on micro. And then obviously, it will still be a week and a half of your Easter break left before you come back to your mocks. And your econ mocks is in the second week. Monday is paper 1, and the Wednesday is paper 2.
So we only come in on most
How do you find the magnitude?
That's not been confirmed, but yeah, that's what your relevant doing.
Magnitude.
Oh,
It's like
So you do square root of the whole thing. I feel like I even did this wrong. Wait,
it won't be
but
6 now, it's 6 squared.